Hello everyone, welcome to our next lecture on the Introduction to Human Anatomy. This is going to cover the body planes and sections. So we'll define what a plane is, what a section is, and then we'll describe the three major planes, the transverse plane, the frontal plane, and the sagittal plane. All right, so let's define what planes and sections are. So a plane, an anatomical plane, is an imaginary board that passes through the body. So you can see it's like two planes here. So a horizontal plane, right, an imaginary horizontal board, and an imaginary vertical plane here, imaginary vertical boards, right? So these are planes, and I can take these planes and I can pass them through the human body. And basically what this will do is it will create sort of a plane where you can make what are called sections. So a section is a cut through the body, in particular through a specific plane. So that's why these two go together, right? When you're making a section or a cut, you're always going to be making a section or a cut through a particular plane, through one of these particular imaginary boards. Okay? So, like I said, there are three major body planes in section: the sagittal plane in section, the frontal plane in section, and the transverse plane in section, which you can see depicted here. So, sagittal is going to be the blue one, frontal is going to be the purple one, and transverse is going to be the green one. Okay? So, let's talk about these individuals. Let's talk about the sagittal plane and section first. So sagittal plane in this image you're going to see is the red and the yellow. And in general, what sagittal planes and sections do is they separate right side from left side, right? Now, notice that the red one is going to be right down the middle, perfectly down the middle of the body. That is specifically called a mid-sagittal section. It separates the body into equal right and left sides. Now, you can also have sagittal planes like the yellow one, where it still separates right and left, but it's not perfectly down the middle. It's like off to the side a bit. So these are called parasagittal planes, and the one that you see in yellow. Now, they're called parasagittal because these parasagittal planes are always going to be parallel to the mid-sagittal plane. So parallel, parasagittal, that's why it has para at the beginning. Also, one thing really quick before I move on. This mid-sagittal plane, this is the midline we were talking about. Remember, we were talking about directional terms, about medial, lateral, and I told you there's this imaginary line. I mean, technically it's an imaginary board, imaginary plane. It's the mid-sagittal plane. That's our midline. Next is a frontal plane. So frontal plane is going to be the blue one that you see in this picture. And so notice that this frontal plane divides the body into front and back. Now this one's going to be kind of right down the middle. Frontal planes don't have to be. You can have a frontal plane that's a little bit more anterior. You have one that's a little bit more posterior. But either way, as long as it separates front and back, that's a frontal plane. And you can see an example of kind of a frontal plane, frontal section in this image here. So doing a frontal section through the head so that you can see some of the structures in the head, sinuses, and the inside of the nasal cavity, the oral cavity. And this will give you a different perspective than if you were to do a sagittal section through that same structure in the body. Last is what's called a transverse plane. So transverse plane is a section that divides top and bottom. And you can see a transverse plane in green here, right? Separates the top of the body from the bottom of the body. Now, again, transverse planes don't have to be just in this one spot. You know, as long as it separates top and bottom, it can be anywhere. So you can have a transverse plane through the head here, through the eyes, or through the mouth, or through the neck, or through the chest. And as long as it separates top and bottom, it's a transverse plane and or section. And so that's what you're seeing in this model here. This model shows you a transverse section through the head, particularly right at the level of the eyes, so that you can see the top of the eye up here and the bottom of the eye down here. Now these planes and sections are going to be really important, particularly if you ever like move on to things like looking at different types of medical imaging, so like MRIs and things like that, really require you to understand, your planes and sections very, very well, and be able to think of these things in 3 dimensions. All right, so next, which of the following body planes would pass through the left and right ears? So this is kind of a challenging question, right? And I did this on purpose. I wouldn't ask you a question like this on the test. Uh, for one reason, because technically there will be more than one right answer here, and I don't like to do that on the test because I want you guys to be able to pick your answers quickly. But I think this is a really good teaching opportunity for you to have a very difficult question like this where I can explain it to you. Right? So body planes that would pass through the left and right ears. Right? So I included the picture here for visual reference. On the test, you're probably going to need to be able to do this in your head, which is one of the challenging things about it. So your ears are here, right? So right away, you should notice the picture gives you a big hint because you can see this purple plane that would be passing right through both the left and right ears, right? And so what was that purple plane called? Right? That one's a frontal plane. So D is one of our answers here. Okay, so if we looked at the mid-sagittal plane, which is the blue one, that one's going to go between the two ears. Definitely, we can't go through both ears together. What about the parasagittal plane? So parasagittal would be just a little bit over to the right here. And even if it went through one ear, it's never going to go through both. It can only go through one, not the other. So it can't be a parasagittal plane. What about a transverse, which is the green one here, right? What if I were to take this transverse plane and make it go through the ear right here? Would it go through the other one too? And hopefully you can see that it will. So technically A is also correct. But like I said, like on the test, I won't give you a question like this where there's two correct answers. There would only be one.